that have come in advance of the call, so I figured I'd start with those questions, maybe warm everybody up, and then open the mic. So the first question I got was from someone asking to clarify. I think they read the FADA newsletter about the last sentence of paragraph 14A14 of the notice, which has to do with Section 3. And that last sentence of the paragraph reads in the notice, in addition, Section 3 may apply to the project after conversion based on receipt of the use of federal financial assistance for rehab activities. So the question is that sentence a new requirement? Does that mean in any way that the RAD office has changed the previous policy that Section 3 does not apply after conversion? So the answer to that is that no, this is not a new requirement. We've not changed the game. We're sorry that this sentence has caused some confusion. What it was purely intended to mean was that if a PHA or an owner, after conversion, happens to get some federal financial assistance that requires Section 8 as part of that assistance, such as, for example, in 2 or 3 years, the PHA gets home funds to make some repairs to the project, or somewhere down the line, the owner decides to refinance the property and uses a 221D4 mortgage insurance, those two programs require compliance with Section 3. But otherwise, no, there's no ongoing requirement after you convert, after you do the initial repairs under RAD for compliance with Section 3 of the 68 Act. So hopefully that will take care of that. I think we've put an FAQ posted on the website on that, so if anyone if it comes up again, they'll find it. A second question that I received prior to the call was, do site and neighborhood standards, quote unquote, apply to any buildings where the units are simply being rehabbed? Or are they applicable only when there's new construction? So a HUD, the answer being a HUD site neighborhood standards review will only be conducted in connection with new construction. There will be no HUD site neighborhood standards review for any existing building. So if a PHA is rehabbing an existing site or doing a no debt conversion, there's no site neighborhood standards. Moreover, if a PHA is transferring the assistance to an existing structure, maybe it's picking up the public housing subsidy and moving it across town to a building that already exists, doesn't even have to be owned by the PHA, then there also is no HUD review of site neighborhood standards. There's no HUD review of site neighborhood standards. It is only site neighborhood standards and HUD review of site neighborhood standards only applies when there's new construction activity, when you're building new or replacement units. Okay, the third question that has come in was, can a PHA do both RAD and Section 18 on the same project? So Section 18 being the Section 18 of the statute where housing authorities under public housing can dispose and demolish projects. And so the answer is, can I combine Section 18 and RAD? So the answer is yes, but not for the same units. So a PHA can go down the path for Section 18 for, let's say, 1/3 of the site and decide to remove the units through Section 18 and decide to convert or preserve the rest of the site through RAD. It's just you can't have both for the same unit. You can't have sort of been approved for demolition and proceed with the demolition for a unit and then also get RAD. But there are many PHAs that combine the two as long as it's not for the same units. So, all right, so with those first three kind of softball questions for me, we'll look to see if anybody has called in. And so I haven't gone through how you raise your hand, but I assume people sort of get that trick by now. So we'll go, our first question is from Helen Crum.
Yes.
Helen, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm here with Ron Law, and we've got a question.
Oh, Ron Law, a name from the past. Oh my gosh, we were waiting how long you were going to call us in. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, we have a laundry list, actually.
You do.
Okay, on the environmental review, and I'm referring now to where it explains on page 98 which projects require a Part 50 versus a Part 58. We are looking at a project where we expect to do 4% tax credits and a short-term 20-month bond taken out by a 223F. Is this going to take a Part 50 or a Part 58?
So I can't answer that question until I add oh, actually, let me take it back. So it's FHA insurance, so it's definitely going to be a Part 50.
Okay.
Yep. All FHA insured loans require Part 50 review, and so therefore, your MAP lender should be very familiar with the environmental review requirements, and the lender will submit an environmental report, and the HUD production team inside FHA will review that under Part 50.
Yeah, the only reason I had a question is that loan won't close when the conversion closes because of the 20-month takeout.
And you're converting to PV or PVRA?
PPP.
So it won't close to do the takeout, but it's still a 223F loan, and at the time that you do the RAD closing, it's part of the sources and uses, or what?
Well, it's a...
I mean, 223F is not a loan where you do a... I mean, if you're using a 223F loan, it's effective immediately. I don't... It's endorsed.
Well, the thing is, we've got a 20-month bond issue. So for the first 20 months, the project will be financed by the bonds, and then those bonds will be taken out by the 223F.
Yeah, I think we're going to consider that sort of all part of the financing for the deal, and I can't imagine it. I mean, at some point you're going to, even if it were sort of not effective for 20 months, I mean, FHA is going to require a 50 on it. So I'm going to assume you're going to require a Part 50 at the time of closing. But
okay, the only reason I ask is that in the kickoff calls they've been talking Part 58. So we will negotiate that then with the with our transaction managers.
Yeah, but also make sure you talk with whoever the FHA lender and the production staff when because yeah, I'm pretty sure you're going to require it at the time, and it's going to be a Part 50. Okay.
Okay. Next question. For transfers of assistance, it says we have 90 days to identify the site. It's not entirely clear when that clock starts. Does it start 30 days after the publication of the final notice?
Yes.
This per project. Okay.
Yep.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we had we asked a question last webinar about the tenants who 30% of their income is more than the contract rent, and
right.
We were told we had to collect it. And I believe it was said at that time, but I wanted to confirm this, is that if we have an existing project where the tenant is currently paying the contract rent, even though 30% of their income is more than the contract rent. And we were told that on their next research that we should increase the rent. The question is whether we need to phase that increase in.
Okay, so the first thing is, so you say currently the family is paying the contract rent. So in public housing, there isn't a concept of contract rent. So do you mean they're paying the flat rent?
No. This project has already converted. It closed in December of 2013.
Oh, so closed there in 2013, and the family, and what were they paying prior? Or had this rule been in place, in effect at the time, would this have been an increase to them of more than X%, or was this?
I think when the family first moved in, they were in that phase-in for 3 years, but then but now they're up to the max of what the contract rent is. But what I'm saying is now that their 30% is greater than that. So do they start paying it at the next research?
Let me ask you this. Tee up that question. Although I may have already seen it in sort of we have a log of sort of outstanding FAQs that we work off of every week. But if you haven't teed it up, if you tee it up and send more of the specifics of it, because of the change in our policy in terms of whether that family should then now get a sort of a phase-in, I think we certainly would be sympathetic. But if you can't, rather than holding up everyone else for call, just the specifics of it, send us some more of the detail, and we'll respond. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Next question is, if I'm reading page 77 correctly, with respect to PBRA being treated as a pre-1980 something, we can lease up to 25% of the units to someone with an income between 50 and 80% without having to get any kind of special approval. Is that correct?
Yeah, you actually can lease all the way up to 80% without getting HUD approval, because the way that has been implemented since the mid-'80s was that these pre-81 projects were so predominantly very low income that HUD issued guidance at the time that said, until such time as which those numbers change, we don't believe that there needs to be anything that an owner has to do, because as a nation, we're already well under the threshold for compliance. So just you're treated as a pre-81, and the 4350.3 I think addresses that.
Right. Yeah, I think the 25% number came actually from the final notice. It's in there on page 77.
Yeah, but I think again that the way housing has implemented that over the years is for all pre-81 properties, that there's nothing an owner needs to do. They just have to make sure the family is income eligible, generally under 80%, but doesn't have to make any effort to ensure that they're low versus very low, because of the national compliance is such. So
I see.
So just I would defer to, you're like any other pre-81 property and what housing has for guidance. And I think we sort of asked this recently of them, and they said, yeah, that guidance still exists. You don't have to worry about it.
Okay. The final notice indicates that there needs to be a utility consumption baseline for new construction, and I'm not sure that doesn't compute with me. So something I don't understand here.
Yeah, hold on. Yep, well, I'm just going to check with our team member before I give you an answer. Hold on. Ron, we concur that there's we need to huddle on that. So sorry, I can't give you that answer now. We'll send you back a response, and we'll post it on the website for others on whether the options are you either use the current property, which is you're going to be new construction, so that's not going to be terribly applicable, or you're going to use a projection that you'll have your architect or whatever use, or it's not applicable at all. I think it's the one in the middle, but I don't want to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll get back.
The final thing, I think it's just a typo. Do you have the final notice in front of you?
We do. Yeah.
Page 99, the last bullet. It says RAD application, but I think it should say financing plan. I don't have it in front of me.
This is with responsible. This is having to do with the responsible entity. The paragraph for responsible entity. You're saying page 99.
Page 99, last bullet. Yes. It says the PHA must submit the responsible entity's finding of exempt activity with their RAD application.
Yep, you're right. Yep, thanks. Should be financing plan.
Okay.
Okay, so for the rest of the world that doesn't have the RAD notice in front of you, this has to do with a Part 58 review and the various paperwork you're going to get back from the responsible entity, and it's the Form 7015.15, and it said that you're going to submit that responsible entity's finding of exemption with your RAD application, what it really means your RAD financing plan. So, yes, thanks, Ron.
Okay, and that's the end of my laundry list.
Okay, thanks. Not so bad. Okay, thanks. Next hand we have raised, Joe Schiff. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Greg. Two quick questions. Number one, am I correct in assuming if a conversion is made in the future to PVRA and a resident at 30% of their income is over the contract rent, they pay the higher amount of money?
Yep. Up to market. Yep, up to market.
Up to whatever the market rent is?
Yep.
Okay. Second question is,
and by
most of us on this call are also on the RAD mailing list, email list. Is there any way when you all add to the FAQs, you can automatically send out those additional FAQs to those on the RAD mailing list?
Right. So we just talked about that this morning in a meeting. We've got this weekly meeting on outstanding FAQs, and let's say, how should we notify people? So there's actually a query function in the resource desk where you can ask it, can you tell me any new FAQs that were issued today, any that were issued the last week? As you can go, you can define your time frame.
Right.
So we think that maybe we just need to publish that more so people know they on their own can go in and just check, oh, what did I miss this week?
Why would it be so difficult for the keeper of the mailing list to send it out automatically once a week?
It's possible. I just wonder. It's what we were debating is we expect every week we're going to be. I mean, every day we're posting stuff, right? And so is that redundant? But we'll even though we expect to be issuing FAQs daily and weekly, you'd still like to get a reminder?
I would like to get the FAQs automatically sent to the email.
Okay, so we'll take it up with our team here because we definitely are sympathetic. We want to sort of make sure everyone understands. We don't want to overload people, but we could definitely do that. Okay, I
think we all want to stay current. That's all. Thanks a lot.
Yep, thank you. Margaret Allen. Margaret, you have a question?
Margaret, you might need to unmute your phone. All right, Margaret, we'll come back to you.
So, okay, we have a question, a follow-up to my site neighborhoods. On the site neighborhood review, what if the project is a combination new construction and rehab? The new construction is on the same site as rehab. That new construction element will undergo a site neighborhood standards review. So it doesn't matter if it's one unit or it's all of the units, and it doesn't matter if it's back on the same site. Any new construction will require a HUD review of site neighborhood standards. Now, that said, we're coming out with some guidance, and as quickly as we can. We're working on it now, working with FHEO to identify what it is that we expect of people when they submit for site neighborhood standards that will allow them to better make undertake the review. So that's coming. That's forthcoming. But yes, any new construction is required to be subject to the HUD's review of site neighborhood standards. Okay. Just looking through our list to see if we got more questions. All right. So we had a couple people that had raised their questions, but then either they couldn't get the pin or whatever. So I'm just going to wait another minute to see if anyone who was having trouble. Here we go. Margaret Allen, because you're back on. Okay, Margaret, what, you have a question?
Yes. Yes. Okay. A couple of questions. On page 95, when you calculate a developer fee,
yeah.
It says for non-tax credit transactions, it's 10% of all costs less developer fee reserves and acquisition costs and non-arm's length transactions. But for tax credit deals, it's 15% of total development costs, which includes acquisition.
Yep.
So can you let us have acquisition on the non-tax credit deals as a part of the developer fee?
Can you, are you saying, will you change the policy and make it applicable for the non-tax deals?
Yes.
No. So the notice is, this way, and clearly just about everything in the notice went through intensive sort of review from a policy level from all sorts of offices. So that was consciously scripted that way. Clearly anybody who wants to request a waiver of a notice can send in, just like you can request a waiver of any regulation at HUD. But that was quite purposely written the way it was.
Can you tell us why? What's the difference?
So on that, so it's not always a good answer when like a civil servant says those are the rules, but can't necessarily explain to you the rationale behind it. This has been around since the very first notice, and so if you give me some time, I'll go back and talk to the broader team that worked on the original notice when this first got debated, because it didn't, we really wasn't subject to debate the second round because it was accepted policy, and we'll either cover it on the next call or we'll send you a response. Okay, Margaret?
Sure. Second question, there's all through the notice there's comments that if you have excess proceeds from your financing, you can take it out and do other good works by the Housing Authority?
Yep, only good work. Go ahead.
No, got it right, no bad work. But the notice, can you speak to the FHA underwriting mortgagee letter as well? Because it's,
go ahead, keep going.
It says here, when it talks about acquisition costs in the mortgagee letter, for public housing conversions, the acquisition cost may be included in the FHA underwriting, but only in the form of a seller note or a long-term land lease that is subject to cash flow. But sometimes I don't need the entire acquisition or ground lease cost to be in a seller note, that I can pay some cash towards acquisition, which then follows the RAD notice allowing cash out to do other good works. Am I okay there?
Yeah, so unfortunately I don't have a FHA rep with me now. We work so closely with the FHA team that I wouldn't want to opine for them on this question. That clearly the RAD program is permissible of cash out. If you are able to finance more than your needs, good for you. If that's what you want to do. But if FHA is tighter in its own rules, then we have to live by whatever the funder, in this case, or the insurer does. Margaret, when's the next FHA lender call? Is it coming up?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't remember. I sent this in a couple of weeks ago.
You did to the RAD thing, or to the FHA lender call agenda?
FHA. I sent it to Sean.
Okay. We'll check with him and find out where it is.
Okay. I think everybody was going to meet this week. I thought you might have been part of it.
Yeah. No, I think I may have missed it.
Okay.
You have another question, Margaret?
No.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. Question from Jaime Bornave. Jaime.
Hey, Greg. Good afternoon. I understand you've taken a call or two on site neighborhood standards, and I wasn't on for that. But so if you've already answered this, I'll catch up later. So the process for the site neighborhood standard review, is that a local or is that a HUD central RAD review? And is there a checklist or a form or a protocol for submitting that request?
Yeah, so right now it's a headquarters function. I mean, you'll do it through the TM and we'll forward it along, but it's under consideration about whether some of that can be down the road, possibly decentralized, or if projects meet a certain criteria, whether they then just automatically get approved and don't have to get processed anymore. You know, the big issue is it an area of minority concentration? And so one of the things we're thinking about is just creating a tool that allows people to put in the census tract and pop up the number and all. So right now we're sort of intensively working inside the building with a bunch of offices, including FHEO, including CPD, to come up with some additional guidance on relocation, site neighborhood standards, and fair housing. And we're looking to package as one revised the previous relocation notice, updating it to include these other things like site neighborhood standards. And I think the goal is at that point that you'll have sort of one merged checklist with different thresholds. And with that, you'll have very clear instructions for what a PHA needs to submit to document that a site meets site neighborhood standards. So on that, that we're working as quickly as we can to get that out to people. And so I guess all I can say in the short term is just sort of sit tight for that additional clarifications. In the meantime, projects that are have to move forward more quickly, the TM will work with you to try to give you as best guidance we can about what to submit.
Okay, thank you. And similarly for the front-end civil rights review,
yeah,
who does that go through? Is that going to ultimately be the same package?
Yes, yeah, the same whole thing. So it all will be done with one thing. And again, to provide probably more clarification on saying, okay, well, if there's no change from, say, moving from a family property to elderly property, if there's no major change in bedroom distributions, if, you know, issues like that, if there's not a transfer of assistance, then possibly those are exempted, and only if they hit a trigger do they move on. But that will also be done. This effort that we're doing right now is attempting to come up with what might be one uniform checklist that the PHA will send us that will allow those deals to know where they go and whether they get auto-approved.
Okay, good, very helpful. And a tangential question in regard to, you know, if there's a change in configuration, is a survey of the residents indicating their preferred relocation options? Is that a useful thing to have as part of that analysis?
They're preferred. So this is so hard because of sort of kind of case specific. So the big concern that, of course, for fair housing purposes is the relocation going to be more than 12 months. So if it's less than 12 months, the preferred doesn't really, right? Because it's not really an issue. And since everyone has a absolute right to return, the only thing I guess that really would matter is if for some reason someone's not returning, has the PHA clearly documented that the family has voluntarily waived their right to return and wasn't in any way coerced. Sorry, it's sort of a tougher one to answer right now, but maybe when we get this subsequent guidance, we'll be able to help you more.
Okay, good. Yeah, that was kind of standard practice in Hope 6 days. You know, we in the survey we'd address both the temporary relocation and the permanent relocation, and that way we at least found out what residents would like if it were available.
Right, and again, just sorry so what makes RAD so different is that under Hope 6 there was no requirement for people to come back. Here is everyone is supposed to come back, and if they're not, that's really what we're, one of the things that is being looked at is saying, well, why isn't someone coming back? Is it because, hopefully it's because they voluntarily waived their right to return. Then they'll want to see that, yes, those families were properly notified, and they chose that with full understanding.
Right. Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, Jaime. Stephen Knight, you have your hand raised.
Yes. Hi. Thanks again for doing the call. Stephen Knight with the National Housing Law Project in San Francisco. We're kind of going through and trying to create our own internal red line here. And one of the questions that popped up is on page 25 under the green building and energy efficiency section.
Okay.
On the first full paragraph on 25, it used to say that HUD would award preference points for using those certifications in green building, and now it says HUD strongly encourages. And I wonder if you could just talk about that.
Sure. So remember when we put the notice out for the first time a couple years ago, that at that time we weren't sure how many PHAs would apply, and so since we thought we would be oversubscribed from the get-go, that there was going to be preference points or ranking points or something, and those included such things as projects that were doing more than a certain amount of work, also projects that were meeting green building standards. But after that first 30-day window, we only had about 12,000 units apply. So therefore, after that period, it's always been since then first come, first serve. And so in a first come, first serve world, there is no points, whether for amount of rehab or green building. So that's why we removed that, because it's now a moot issue.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Jared Kummer, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple quick questions of clarification for MTW agencies.
Okay.
Contract rents that are adjusted by the OCAP, we can't use MTW authority to adjust the rents. That's something MTW agencies can't waive, that requirement.
Because once you're converting under RAD, if you move to PBRA, you're completely out of MTW.
Right.
But even if you went to PBV, this is a case where the RAD rules trump the MTW. So no, you can only adjust by the OCAP after you convert.
Okay, and if we use MTW block grant authority to increase initial rents at the beginning, we have to have more than one project?
Yes. Yeah, you can't come in for just one project.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Jared. Margaret Allen, you had a follow-up question.
Yes, if I've got a project where the owner is a private owner, but the housing authority essentially leased all the units and pays the owner the ACC contract, what have I got? They think they have a RAD project. They think they have a RAD conversion project. So my owner will convert those units to Section 8. But is there anything else different except I need to pay attention to housing authority control issues in the RAD notice?
Well, yeah. So we certainly encourage PHAs as a way of repositioning older, public housing projects to use the transfer assistance provision to move some subsidies somewhere else, possibly in a better neighborhood and all that stuff. But when you do that, you still have to comply with the RAD ownership and control provisions. So If that owner were a nonprofit or a public body, you'd be fine. But if that owner is if it's a for-profit, then the PHA must still maintain an interest in the project. And the notice issues a bunch of bullets that goes through, and you got to say, okay, does it satisfy one of those bullets? And
right. Okay.
Right. And if it turns out,
I saw that. I was just wondering if there's anything else.
Yeah, no, that's it. If it turns out, Margaret, that particular thing still is not clear, then if you give us the fact pattern, we'll get it reviewed by OGC to make sure so you don't blow through a lot of money, you know, realizing and then later realizing it's not eligible.
Got it. Well, they've had a CHAP award.
They have a CHAP award.
Yeah, somebody thinks they're eligible.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Sometimes when you give someone a CHAP award, that the ownership structure is not something that we investigated as part of making the award. We're assuming they know that the rules are, and that eventually they're going to have to comply. So we've not sort of with the issuance of the CHAP in any way honored or accepted their ownership arrangement.
Last question. One of the things that my owner has been told is that the housing authority can get X number of dollars in rent subsidy for this project and will pass on X minus 10% to the owner. Does that sound right?
So the HAP contract is the HAP contract. The owner, the PHA can't in any way say I'm taking $10 off the top for that.
Okay, that's what I thought too.
PHAs can. It's part of a negotiation. If they're entering into a deal with a separate body who's going to be the owner, some PHAs say, well, this was my property you're building on. I want a land lease. You know. So there's.
Yeah, no, that's
right.
Okay.
So, okay. Thanks, Margaret. Natik Patel. Natik, do you have a question?
Yes, I think, like I don't have a question, but I remember that in the early days when we rolled out this RAD 101, we were having a point system, and we were giving like 10% to the building who, whoever come up with the new building design, which will satisfy the LEED certification, at least LEED certifications, or green building construction and green building design. So now, are we encouraging the housing authority to come up with that green building design and construction practices, or I didn't follow?
Yeah, so we certainly are encouraging. We have no additional resources to make available. So it is purely the funding the PHA receives under the public housing program that they're converting over to, and some are able to find a way to do a lot with respect to energy and green building, and some don't. They say, hey, the resources just don't add up. I can't do some level of green certification. So there is nothing required in terms of green building, but highly encouraged.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Natik. All right, we're going to take one last look to see if we've got any more questions. Last time we looked, there weren't any. We got some written questions. We're going to look at some of these written questions. If we have a portfolio-wide award and a CHAP for certain buildings, and now want to proceed on other buildings, can we do that? In other words, can you switch out your the properties in the first round from the second round? Yes, you can do that. Many people have, so the answer is yes. Work with your transaction manager to make that happen. If I have a building of 40 ACC or 40 public housing units and want to convert only 20 of them, can I do that? It's a little iffy. If you have 40 scattered sites units and you want to take 20 of the scattered sites, that's fine, because you're still left with sort of separate properties that you can consider sort of distinguishable. If what you're saying is I want to take a 40-unit mid-rise elderly building and take 20 units out of that and convert those 20 units and keep the remaining as public housing, generally the answer is no on that. You've got to convert either the project or whole buildings in the project. Generally, is the rule. If you sometimes if it's more complicated than that, you can sort of send us a question. But the general thing is it's whole buildings or whole projects. I'm going to just run through a couple other questions that were written for us. If the transaction includes new construction and rehab, but the RAD units are now just being rehabbed with new construction, they were non-RAD, being on an adjacent site, would it still go through site neighborhood standards? So if the transaction includes new construction and rehab, but the RAD units are just being rehabbed with new construction, being on an adjacent site. So it doesn't matter if it's on-site or adjacent, and it's new construction, new site neighborhood standards applies. If what you're saying is those buildings were under construction prior to RAD, then the issue is if they're still under construction and they're not, and they would still be considered new construction. If you've already placed them in service and now you want to transfer the RAD units into them, then that would be considered existing housing. So that's sort of a fine line. Let me see. Go through. Are you aware of any RAD conversions using CDBG or disaster funding? So CDBG is an eligible use, I'm pretty sure. I'm trying to think if I remember. There's certainly lots of places where people are using home funds, but CDBG disaster funding, we're not aware of anyone that is doing that, although I'm not sure if that means it wouldn't be permissible. We're not aware of that. That question submitted by Leo Quigley. So thank you. Jason Israel has just sent a text in saying that Coffeyville Lamoureux, which is one of the projects in Maricopa County, I think, or Phoenix, is using CDBG funds. So yes, you can use CDBG funds. Thank you. Question on ownership or control. Can a new development site be on land leased from a for-profit? Yeah, you can. The land can be leased from a for-profit. It's still whether the property itself, who owns and controls the property. The leasing can be separate from that. Another question that we're reading. Following up on the 40-unit question, if the 40 units are in 20 buildings, side-by-side duplexes, could you use only 20 RAD and keep 20 ACC, or take the other 20 and put it in a different site? Yeah, you could do both that. As long as you can easily separate them into sort of separate, manageable, marketable projects, there's no problem taking 20 units away from a 40-unit public housing site and either keeping the remaining 20 units as ACC or taking the remaining 20 units and transferring them somewhere else, the assistance to some other place. I've got a couple more hands raised, so I've got Pat Costigan. Hey, Pat, you got a question?
Hey, Greg, I wanted to go back to the question about green building.
Yeah.
So I think we understand how it is now, but can you talk a little bit more about where the department, the administration more generally, is going with the green CNA? And when that comes into play, what we might expect to see in the standards. In other words, what are the goals and objectives that you can generally frame for us now about where this is going in 6 months?
So I'm going to offer this and then confirm back. I hate to do this, but I want to say I'm pretty sure what I'm going to answer is correct, but but the team that's working on the CNA is not here with me today. But it should be no different than the current PCA we do, which is there will be a green element to it, but still those improvements are not required. It's you could identify certain improvements, but if the deal cannot afford to make those green improvements, then you're not required to do those elements.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay, next question. Helen Crum, you have another question.
Yeah, I do. I don't know if you know this answer or not, but it's with regards to the OCAF.
Okay.
Like Ron had explained, we've got a project that's already up and running, and the contract date is in January. According to the OCAF in the HAP contract, we have to file our request for OCAF increase by the 1st of September, 120 days before our contract date. But right. The OCAF isn't published until 10/10. So how can we submit that in September when we don't know what the percentage is going to be until October?
And this is a multifamily PPRA conversion, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would suggest you to call your project manager in PPRA. I mean, you should have one for every project.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that they, I'm sorry that I don't have the answer myself, but this should be a very common occurrence in multifamily. So there's got to be a quick answer for that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Jaime, you've got another question.
Yes, Greg, thanks. So the president came out with an executive order about using solar panels in affordable housing. Will we see any changes or references to this going forward in RAD?
And Jaime, the first I've heard of the executive order, when did it come out?
Earlier this week.
Huh. So sorry that it didn't sort of pop up on my
okay.
screen. Let us track it down, and we'll see what the implications are.
I'll forward you the notice on it. And then the other related question, and I'm sure you don't have an answer for this yet, the Supreme Court decision on disparate impact, is that going to play into FHEO reviews at all, or is it way too early to know?
Yeah, I think, yeah, way too early. But I'm right.
All right.
Okay, thanks, Jaime.
Thanks.
Okay. I'm just going to look to see if other hands are raised. We'll just go back to the submitted questions. We answered many of them, but there's still a few. Let's see if what we have. Okay. Okay, so I think we've got most of them. There's one or two that look sort of technical that I think we'll handle through not on the phone but with email. So okay, so I think it looks like we're through with our questions. We don't see any others that have sort of come in, and so I think we'll stop here. Again, thanks. These are helpful for us to know kind of where we still have policy and guidance gaps, and we'll work to get the questions we were able to answer on the phone out to you at the time next week. All right. Thanks, everybody, very much.